Hello everyone, this is Mr. Jackson, and today we're going to be going into Unit 2, Concept 2, which is going to be looking specifically at how our bodies create movement. Now, really quick overview. So we have these joints or articulations, and whenever we refer to a joint, this is referring to where two or more bones come together or meet. Okay, so where two bones come together, that is called a joint. And these joints are what ultimately give your skeleton mobility, and they help to hold it all together. Okay, because remember, you're made up of 206 bones. Those bones and their meeting points at joints are what provide for mobility and for structure, holding everything together. Body movements are going to happen when muscles contract, right? So they shorten, they are active, and they contract across these joints. And this is going to be moving one bone toward another bone. And so muscles pulling on bones between 2 points is how we actually create for all of this movement. Now, we have some important connective tissues that we want to know the difference between. We have ligaments, which attach bone to bone, and we have tendons, which attach muscle to bone. Okay, so remember, ligaments, bone to bone, tendons, muscle to bone. We will need to make sure that we have those differentiated. And joints are ultimately going to be classified based on either their structure or their function, their anatomy, or the way that they function, their physiology. So functional classification is based on what they do. So how much movement do they actually allow for? Okay. Now, the less movable or the less mobile a joint, typically the more stable it is. Okay, so there's this two-sided coin where we have some sort of a balance or a play between how stable a joint is, which is how much it can resist movements in certain directions, and how mobile a joint is, which is how much it can facilitate movement in certain directions. So typically, as a joint becomes more mobile, it becomes less stable, and vice versa. Okay, you have three main types of joint classification based on how much movement is allowed. Okay, you have what are called synarthroses. Okay, these are non-moving, non-mobile joints, very, very stable. An example would be the part of the skull that's protecting the brain, right? So your cranium. We have these joints where the bones come together are called synarthroses, and these are very, very stable and good thing too, because they are protecting your brain. We want very stable bones around our brain. We have what are called amphiarthroses, which are only slightly movable joints. An example here is where your pubic bones meet in the pelvis. So it allows for a little bit of movement, which is a good thing, but for the most part, these are primarily stable joints that only allow movement when absolutely necessary or in a small, set of circumstances. And then you have diarthroses. These are freely moving joints. Okay, so these are the most mobile, the least stable. Good examples here like your knee and your elbow joints. These are going to be mainly in our limbs because we use them for so many different things, namely locomotion, and for the way that we manipulate and interact with our environment, primarily through those limbs. So some structural classification, so more on the anatomy side, is based on what binds the bones together, okay? And that's in the joint and if there's a cavity present, okay? So we're going to get into what that means. So you have three main types of structural classifications. You have what we call fibrous joints. So these connect bones with the collagen fibers of what we call dense connective tissue. This is something that we're going to look at under a microscope so that we can kind of see the anatomy of this. Fibrous joints are the most immovable. Okay, so highly stable joints. Some examples of this, again, go into the bones in the skull. The way that those are held together, we have these fibrous joints called sutures. Okay, so we can actually see examples here on the skull of what these sutures look like. Okay, so these are these fibrous joints that connect those bones with high stability. Another example would be the fibula and the tibia in your lower leg, right? So you see the tibia here on the left and the fibula on the right. Okay, so remember this tibia is mainly weight bearing. Your fibula is there more for stability and support. So these are another example that they're held together by ligaments only. These fibrous joints that are held together by ligaments only are called syndesmoses. And then the way in which your teeth are actually embedded in their sockets, those are fibrous joints, and those are called gomphoses, okay? So really what I need you to take from this in terms of the general type is the fact that these are fibrous joints that are highly stable and very immovable. The next type of structure would be cartilaginous joints, which implies that this is going to connect bones with cartilage. Okay. Now these can be rigid but also slightly movable, and again the function that's required of these is ultimately going to indicate why they are anatomically structured the way that they are. Okay, so rigidity for support's sake, but slightly movable for other purposes. So some examples here: an immovable joint made of a bar or plate of hyaline cartilage between the sternum and the first rib, we would call this a synchondrosis, okay? And you can see that pointed to right here. Now, again, this is primarily rigid, primarily stable, but allows for just a little bit of movement. And you might think about what this rib cage is protecting, and then think to yourself, well, why might a little bit of movement be useful? Give that a thought. Another example would be right here in your intervertebral discs. So we have slightly movable joints made of fibrocartilage, and these intervertebral discs can act as little shock absorbers between the vertebrae, right? So they provide little cushions that can help absorb any sort of shock or force that goes down through your spine. And we would call this a symphysis, a symphysis. And finally, the third and final type based on structure are called synovial joints. These are going to connect bones with dense connective tissues and will actually have a fluid called synovial fluid filling the joint capsule. Okay, so this allows them to be freely movable, and all of our synovial joints are highly mobile, meaning they're all diarthroses based on their classification of function. Okay, so the most movable, and structurally we call them synovial. They have a joint capsule that is filled with synovial fluid that allows for exchange of nutrients as well as reducing any sort of friction force from the rubbing of two bones together. So these are going to be the most mobile. You have 6 special features, and we have these color-coded. We want to make sure that we really understand this diagram of a synovial joint, its general structure, because these are the primary types of joints that we're going to be looking at when we look at movement in this concept, as well as our the fullness of our Unit 2, which is all about skeletal and muscular and the movements they help create. So, 6 special features. Here in pink, you can see at the top here, we have what's called articular cartilage, where these two bones come together or articulate. This is a cartilage that covers the surfaces to prevent any sort of rubbing of the bone tissue. Okay, so even if we were to have a breakdown of this synovial fluid and this capsule, it's still going to help us prevent any sort of rubbing friction between the two. We have in purple the actual cavity itself, so this joint cavity that contains the ends of both of these bones. And we have the joint capsule itself, so it's a fibrous articular joint capsule enclosing the entire cavity. Okay, so the joint cavity is this internal portion. The capsule is the surrounding capsule reinforced by ligaments for structure's sake. And finally, the last slide of this first part of the lecture is going to be the last 3 parts. We, again, have them color-coded. You have here in the middle, in orange, you have synovial fluid. And this is a lubricant that is going to be, again, reducing friction. This is also a really good place where nutrients can be exchanged within the joint capsule. We have a band-like set of ligaments. Okay, again, this is this outside here in light blue, these outside or supporting structures. Remember that ligaments are what connect bone to bone as opposed to tendons, which are muscle to bone. Okay, so we're talking about, for this joint, we're talking about bone to bone connection via ligaments. And then finally, we also are going to have sensory nerve fibers and blood vessels. Those are within the joint capsule and that synovial membrane that basically allows for nutrient exchange and innervation so that we can have nervous and cardiovascular input into these joints as well. And these synovial joints, we're going to pick up on part 2 with this, but we have 6 different types of configurations that we're going to be going into. These are gliding, hinge, pivot, condylar, saddle, and ball and socket. That's going to conclude part 1, and I will see you in part 2 here in just a moment.